In this week's Parsha, the Torah discusses two wars that the Yidden have with the Ummah Yisrael, with the nations of the world. In regards to the first war, the war of Midian, the Torah tells us how the war actually took place. In regards to the second war, it was a war that was going to take place in order to conquer Eretz Yisrael. The Torah says the story of how Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven take it upon themselves to lead the war, to go armed in front of Hashem to war. The difference between these two wars is understood from the Psukim themselves. The war against Midian is, as Hashem says, Nekoim Nikmas Bnei Yisrael, take the revenge on behalf of the Bnei Yisrael from Midian. The point of the war was to kill all the males as a revenge for that which they have done to the Yidden. However, it does not say that the Yidden did this in order to settle the cities. On the contrary, it says that they burnt their cities, they burnt their castles. They only took in captivity the women, the children, and they took spoils from the places, but it wasn't about taking over the cities. Whereas the war of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven with the nations of Eretz Yisrael, so although it's true that for the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven themselves, it wasn't about having the land. They were just driving the enemies out. They themselves were not settling there. They settled on the other side of the Yarden, on the east side of the Yarden, on the Mizrach of the Yarden. Nevertheless, the point of the war clearly was to conquer and settle Eretz Yisrael. As they themselves say, we are going to arm ourselves quickly in front of the Bnei Yisrael until we bring them to their place. And furthermore, they say we're not going to return to our own houses until the Yidden, each one, settles in their land. Says the Rebbe, based on this unique idea of the Milchemes Midian, that it was not about conquering the place, to take it over and to settle there. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we could answer a question that the Ravid asks on the Rambam. And that is, there is a halacha that Shevet Levi is warned not to take a portion in Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Canaan. They don't take the spoils when they conquered those cities. In regards to this halacha, the Rambam says that it seems to me that this only applies in Eretz Yisrael proper, in the place where the bris, the covenant of Avraham, Yitzchak, that Hashem made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and that later their children had inherited, and it was divided to them. This is where the Leviim do not take a portion, and they don't get part of the spoils. But other lands that a Yiddish king conquers, then the Koyim and the Leviim would be like any other Yid in regards to the land and the spoils. So the Ravid asks, well, what about this war of Midian? In the spoils of Midian, the Leviim did not take a portion like the rest of the Yidden. They only got a truma, they got a certain amount that the Yidden gave them as a donation, as something that Hashem commanded them to give them, but it wasn't that they took part of the spoils. So we see clearly from the spoils of Midian that even in the spoils of other lands outside of Eretz Yisrael, Kohanim and Levim do not get like the rest of the Yidden, and they don't get a portion in the land and portion in the spoils. That's the Ravid's question. The Kesef Mishnah defends the Rambam, and it says that the Rambam is of the opinion that on the contrary, Midian itself is a proof that in other lands they would get spoils. Because in Eretz Yisrael itself, the Leviim did not get spoils at all. But in Midian, they did get some of the spoils. And in other words, the Midian itself is coming to teach us about other places that are not part of Eretz Yisrael, that the Leviim do get spoils. If that's the case, why didn't they get equally to all the rest of the Yidden? Says the Kesef Mishnah, that's a Gzeiras HaKosov. That was a decree of the Torah, that was just a one-off in that particular case, that they didn't get the full spoils. The Rebbe, however, says this is Tzorach Iyun Gadol. This answer of the Kesef Mishnah seems to be difficult, because the bottom line is that in Midian they didn't really actually get part of the spoils on their own. As the Rambam calls it was a terumas hameches. This was like a tax or a teruma that the Yidden that got the spoils had to give some of it to the Leviim. So if that's the case, we're really back to the question that if in Midian they are not getting like everyone else, isn't this, as the Ravid puts it, a proof that even outside of Eretz Yisrael, the Leviim don't get spoils? Says the Rebbe, but based on the way we explained the Milchama of Midian being different, that the Milchama of Midian was not about taking their land. It was about taking revenge against them and to kill them. So it's understood that this is very, very different to the rest of the lands that the Rambam is discussing, that the Kohanim and Leviim would take the spoils like the rest of the Yidden, because the Rambam is speaking about those types of wars, that the goal of the war, the purpose of the war, and the way of the war is that the king is conquering the land, we're going to take over this land. Whereas Milchemes Midyan is in a very, very different category. The purpose of it was totally not about conquering Midyan and taking over the land. It was about taking the revenge on behalf of Bnei Yisrael from the Midyanim. And therefore, the Leviim's din and the spoils over there would be different to other lands outside of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, we could still ask a following question. The Rambam paskins, when we make a siege on a city in order to take hold of the city, to capture the city, we don't surround it from all four sides, only from three sides. We leave one side open so that anybody that wants to run away could escape. As the Pasuk says, Vayitzbu'u al Midyan, that they waged war against Midyan or besieged Midyan. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, as Hashem commanded Moshe. Says the Rambam, Mipi Hashmuel Lamdu, this was passed down to us. Chachamim passed down to us that what's Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, that this is what Hashem commanded him. That Hashem commanded him that they should leave by Midyan one part of the city, one side of the city, available for people to escape. Says the Rebbe, 2 points about how this is going to prove to us, seemingly, that it's not only about revenge against Midyan. First of all, the Rebbe says, from the simple wording of the Rambam, it sounds like that according to Rambam, Milchemes Midyan is in the same category as these other cities that we're talking about. The Rambam says, when we place a siege on a city to capture it, that means we're taking over the city. And Midyan is part of this conversation. Furthermore, if in fact the purpose was only going to be to kill the Midyanim, so why would we allow any place for them to escape and to save themselves? In fact, says the Rebbe, the Ragat Shover actually explains that in the Sifri there is a machloikas regarding to this Vayitzbu, to this waging war against Midyan and besieging the city. The Sifri actually has a machloikas, whether they surrounded it from all four sides or only from three sides. According to the Ragat Shover, this is actually what the machloikas is. Was it the purpose for Milchama, like a regular war, and then we would allow them to escape? Or if it was for revenge, and therefore, then we're not going to let them escape. Says the Rebbe, now even though one could argue and say that even in a war that is for revenge and to kill them, there's still some room to leave the fourth side not besieged. And what would be the point of that? It's not about allowing them to be able to save themselves so much, but rather it's in order to cause that the people inside shouldn't be acting in an extra strong way in their fight against the Yidden. Because if they have absolutely no choice, if there's no way out for them at all, there's no room for them to escape, then they're going to be putting in all of their efforts and energies against the Yidden, which chas v'shalom could cause casualties by the Yidden. So if we leave them a little bit of a crack of an opening to escape, that itself lowers their defenses in a certain sense. The Rebbe says, in fact, based on this, possibly we'll be able to explain that that's what the Rambam would mean with his two expressions. He says as follows, and he says, we leave a place for someone to run away, and this would be referring to a milchama like a milchama of revenge, like Milchemes Midyan, where we're just letting them run away. As we said again, it's more about just that they should have a place to escape to so that they don't put in their full energies in the war. And the other words that the Rambam says, anyone that wants to save themselves would actually be referring to the wars where the goal is not about killing them and getting rid of them. It was just about taking the land. So in other words, based on all of this, perhaps we would be able to say that even the Rambam is of the opinion, in other words, these things would seemingly tell us that maybe we could still say that the purpose of Midyan is, in fact, only completely revenge. But the Rebbe says, again, going back to the wording of the Rambam, from the fact that the Rambam includes the word, the idea of Milchemes Midyan, in the halacha where he speaks about how we capture a city to take hold of it, Number one, and furthermore, that the whole halacha that we don't surround the city from all sides, four sides, is specifically for Milchemes Midyan, it still seems to imply that Milchemes Midyan is in some way similar to other wars where the goal is about conquering and taking over the city, and not purely revenge. But if that's the case, then we're back to square one. We're back to the question of the Ravid. If in fact Milchemes Midyan is like the wars of other wars that a Yiddish king is going to conquer another city, so then the question is, why is it that by Bizas Midyan, by the spoils of Midyan, the Leviim are not taking a regular portion together with the rest of the Yidden? Says the Rebbe, based on all of this, we have to say that according to the Rambam, in Milchemes Midyan, it actually has a bit of both ideas. It has both Gedorim. There's two focuses or two goals, two purposes in this war. On the one hand, yes, it was a Milchama for the revenge for Bnei Yisrael, but at the same time, in some ways, it was still similar to a Milchemes Kibush, a Milchama of conquering, similar to the wars of other lands that a king conquers. And even though in the simple reading of the Psukim, we don't find that the Yidden are taking over and settling and taking the land of Midyan, nevertheless, says the Rebbe, the Rambam learns that since the Torah tells us that Vayishbu b'nei Yisrael es neshei Midyan, that the Yidden went and captured the women of Midyan, and their children, and their animals, and their cattle, and they took away all their possessions, and they took the spoils, both of people and animals. And when Moshe Rabbeinu only argues to them and complains for the fact that they let every single one of the females live, so that's what Moshe Rabbeinu had a problem with. In other words, certain ones were supposed to be killed. And it's only the males that even the children had to die. And this is very, very different to Milchemes Amalek, where the command there was clearly to absolutely get rid of all of them and not to have any compassion, and to kill the men, the women, the children, and the animals, etc. So from all of this we could see, since by Midyan it was not like that, that itself tells us that this was not a Milchama, just purely a Milchama just of revenge. So on the one hand, yes, it was a Milchama of revenge, but it wasn't completely to wipe them out, and therefore in some ways it was still somewhat similar to a Milchama of conquering. And therefore, in regards to the halacha of surrounding the city from three sides, or from four sides, so the Rebbe says, since in the case of Midyan, the command was not to kill out all of the people, and therefore the halacha, according to the Rambam, is that we don't surround it from all four sides, we only surround it from three sides. And it's specifically from Midyan that we then learn with a Kal V'chomer. If in Midyan, which was mainly about revenge, and still we let them escape, how much more so in other wars, which was completely just for kibbutz, just for conquering the land, and we take over a city to capture, then for sure we let the people escape. So that's on the one hand. But on the other hand, since Milchemes Midyan was also primarily a Milchama of Nekama, of killing all the males, and any woman that was able to have any relations with a man, and it wasn't mainly about kibush, it wasn't mainly about acquiring these possessions, both in land and in spoils, etc. This is why the spoils in this case, bottom line is not the same exact like all other lands that a king conquers, where the Kohanim and the Leviim would be like the rest of the Yidden. Rather, in this case, there was only something given to the Shevet Levi, which was the Trumas HaMechas, the special tax that was given to them. However, says the Rebbe, we still need to understand. If it was in fact a Milchama mainly about revenge, then why are we giving anything to the Leviim at all? Seemingly, we shouldn't have had to give them anything, even this Trumas HaMechas, even this tax, neither to Elazar HaKohen or to the rest of the Leviim. Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by first looking at something else unique that we find by Milchemes Midyan. And that is in regards to who participated in this war. From the Pasuk, L'choil Matos Yisrael, Tishlechu Latzavad, you should send from all of the Shvatim. Rabbi Akiva learns that this actually includes Shevet Levi as well. That Shevet Levi also participated in Milchemes Midyan. Now the Ragachover explains that this is actually what the Machloikis in Sifri is all about, whether Shevet Levi was also at Midian, because this is again dependent on this idea that we spoke about. We said, is it a war just about a regular war, or is it for revenge? So if it's for a regular war, they wouldn't have been going out. As the Rambam says, that regular wars, they don't go out. But again, if it's for Nekama, they do go out. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva would learn that Shevet Levi went out, being of the opinion that this was a war for Nekama. So the Rebbe asks, the reason why Shevet Levi usually does not get involved in war is, as the Rambam says, because they were separated, midarkei ha'olam, separated from the ways of the world, and therefore they don't get involved in war like the rest of the Yidden. So why is it that for a Milchemes Nekama, a war of revenge, as Midian, would they participate? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, since Shevet Levi, as the Rambam puts it, was Huvdal Lavodas Hashem, they were separated to serve Hashem and to teach Hashem's ways, Hashem's straight ways, upright ways, and His just judgments to all of the Yidden. Therefore, as the Rambam puts it, they were separated midarkei ha'olam. They are the army of Hashem. And that's why they usually don't participate in regular wars. But that itself helps us understand that if it's a war that's not about conquering land, as is the regular way of the world, so that could have a shaychus to Shevet Levi. And therefore, a war that's specifically connected to Hashem, taking the revenge on behalf of Hashem, as we'll see in a minute. Therefore, it very much has to do with Chel Hashem, with the army of Hashem, with Shevet Levi. And therefore, Shevet Levi should also, and specifically, even more than anybody else, participate in such a war. And that's exactly what Milchemes Midian was. The Pasuk says, Allah says, Nikmas Hashem b'Midian. That this is a revenge on behalf of Hashem in Midian. In other words, the whole point of this war is because Midian is standing against Hashem, and therefore, Shevet Levi also needs to participate in this war against Midian, because this is part of their task, part of their job as Chel Hashem, as the army of Hashem, to carry out Nikmas Hashem, the revenge on behalf of Hashem. Says the Rebbe, this will now also help us understand the question we asked before of why we're giving them some of the spoils as a tax, as a truma. The pasuk says, you're going to take off a tax or a section of it and give it to Hashem. And how is this going to be done? You're going to be giving to El-Azar HaKoyin the Truma of Hashem, and then there's a percentage, 1 out of 50, that you're supposed to be giving to the Leviim. What's the point of all of this? Because this is highlighting the idea that this war is not a war like any other war, just to be able to gather spoils and booty, etc. But rather, this is a milchama to carry out the nikmas Hashem, the revenge on behalf of Hashem, and therefore also from those things that were taken, whether from people or animals, it need to be taken, lifted up, Truma is from the word of lifting up, and giving it to El-Azar HaKoyin and the Leviim as the army of Hashem. Says the Rebbe, we still need to understand the halacha that the Leviim don't get involved in war. The Rambam says this in connection to the same halacha that we were discussing, that they don't take a part in Eretz, in the land, and in the spoils, as opposed to other lands. And the Rebbe now quotes the Rambam. Why was Levi not zoich? Why didn't they take a part in Eretz Yisrael and in the spoils together with the rest of his brothers? Because they were separated to serve Hashem, to teach His upright ways and His just mishpatim, and therefore they were separated midarkei olam, from the ways of the world. They don't do war like the rest of the Yidden. They don't take an inheritance in the land, and they don't acquire any of this themselves with their own power of their own bodies. Says the Rebbe, from the reading of the Rambam, from the flow of the Rambam, it seems to be quite obvious that the two halachas, that they don't wage war and that they don't get a part of the land, are connected to each other. They are dependent on each other. As is quite obvious from the ending of the Rambam's words, where the Rambam puts them both together. He says, "Lefichach huvdelu." That's why Shevet Levi was separated. Loy orchin milchama, they don't get involved in war, and loy noichlin, they don't take an inheritance. Says the Rebbe, based on this, what should come out is that the milchamos, those wars of conquering other lands, which we said already, that in other lands, the Rambam tells us, Kohanim and Leviim in those lands, and the spoils of those lands are like the rest of Yisrael. But following what we just said, that it makes sense to say that the Kohanim and Leviim would also be participating in those wars. Because as we said, these two things go together. But the question is, In other words, not like Midian. In Midian, we said it's Nikmas Hashem, so we had an explanation why Shevet Levi should get involved. But in other lands that the king is taking over to conquer the land, what kind of connection do those wars have with Shevet Levi? Says the Rebbe, we're going to explain this by first having a careful look at the wording of the Rambam and what seems to be an extra arichus. The Rambam says, we said before, that these ideas that they don't take a part in the land and the spoil, says the Rambam, She'ein hadvarim amurim, this only applies in the land, She'nichrisa alei bris, about which a covenant was made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. V'yarshua b'neim, and their children inherited it, v'nischalko lahem, and it was divided to them. The Rebbe says, what difference does it make all of these extra details and signs? Wouldn't have it been quite clear if the Rambam just said the words Be'eretz Canaan, as he himself had already said in a previous halacha? We would know exactly which land he's talking about. Even if the Rambam wants to connect it with the fact that it's the Avos, because the reason why we are having this, we're getting it as an inheritance as the children of the Avos. So it could have said Be'eretz Shenitnu LaAvram, and as we find such an expression elsewhere in the Rambam, that sort of expression. What's this whole business of what the Rambam is seemingly saying a chiddush and giving us all these details? Shenichris aleh bris laAvram liYitzchak liYaakov, and then he further has to add v'yarshua b'neiim, and then children inherit it, v'neschalkolem, and it's divided to them. Says the Rebbe, it's in these words that emphasize to us really the difference between the land on which the bris was made and other lands that a king conquers. Eretz Yisrael is a land that even before the Yidden waged this war is already unique and different to all the other lands, by the fact that Hashem made a bris for this land to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Which means to say that from then on, Eretz Yisrael is already a place that's connected and is one with the ones that are going to receive the land. And that's the whole idea of what a bris is all about. When two people go through, the bris usually the way it was done is they would cut up something in half, and the two people making the bris would go between the pieces of that one thing, representing that we are one. In this particular case, this is the land that's connected with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then practically it's coming to the Yidden as when they are going to take it over, and it's going to be divided to them. So in other words, there's nothing new that has to happen in Eretz Yisrael. And when the Yidden do come into Eretz Yisrael, so it's not just going to be enough that they had taken over the land, but as the Rambam says, Neschalkolem, we have to wait till it's fully divided to them. When it's given to them, that now they could actually go ahead and live in it. They could settle in it. Says the Rebbe, therefore, in this particular case, we understand why Shevet Levi is not shaykh to this whole thing. Because again, the land technically is already the Yidden's anyways. The only thing is we need to make sure the Yidden practically settle it and live in it. And this is no shaykh to Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi is completely removed from the world. They are not involved in this type of war. Whereas the other lands that a king, a Yiddish king goes out and conquers, even though, yes, it's true, it becomes like Eretz Yisrael, like Yehoshua had conquered in all regards, in all ways. Nevertheless, these other lands are not something that's an absolute necessity for the Bnei Yisrael. The king is fighting with other nations, not in order that the Yidden should have another portion in the world, what the Rebbe calls a nachla sodav acherem, a place that you can have more fields and vineyards in order to settle over there. But the main point is to broaden the borders of Yisrael and to increase bigdulasoi v'shamoy, in the greatness of the king and the fame, the reputation of the king, which is automatically the greatness and the reputation or the fame of Hashem. That's what it's about. And therefore, says the Rebbe, this type of war of these kind of lands is going to be then shaykh also to Shevet Levi, since they are the Chayil Hashem, they are the army of Hashem, and therefore it's part of their task also to increase the greatness and the fame of Hashem. Concludes the Rebbe with the Hira for each and every one of us in our spiritual avodah. The Rambam paskins that every single Yid, in a certain sense, can be like Shevet Levi. Any person that his heart is generous, he could come to the darga of Shevet Levi. The Rambam paskins la halacha that there's a shaykh to every single person, as the Rambam says, loy Shevet Levi bilvad, but every single person asher nod v'ruchay oisoi, that his mind had brought him to the state that he wants to separate himself and stand in front of Hashem to serve Hashem, is able to become kodesh kadoshim, holy, and Hashem becomes his portion and his lot, just like for the Kohanim and the Levim. So every Yid in his spiritual avodah can be like Shevet Levi, being separated from the world. So a Yid could think to himself, Since he's separated from the ways of the world and he's standing in front of Hashem to serve Hashem, so what do I have anything to do with the whole world around me? We say to this Yid, on the contrary, because you're a Shevet Levi, you have very much of a shaychus, a special shaychus, to get involved in Nikmas Havaya b'Midyan, taking the revenge of Hashem against Midyan, meaning to say, to be victorious and to nullify anything that's against Hashem. What does this mean in Avodas Hashem, the Avodah of a person, specifically? So we know that Midyan generally is connected with the idea of quarreling, fighting, sinas chinam. So this means the milchama against Midyan means to negate, to completely cancel out any sort of separation and sinas chinam that could chas v'sholem be amongst Yidden Rahman al-Litzlan. Because these are the things, as we know, that brought the Churban Abayis, the Golus, and this very last Golus. And as Chayil Hashem, as the Levim, or any Yid that wants to be like this as part of the army of Hashem, we need to bring in a way of isyashvus, in a way of settling, like the Yidden settled, as mentioned before. We have to bring in a way of isyashvus of what should be settled, Avas Yisrael, Avas Chinam, amongst Yidden, all the Yidden, and that's connected, and that connects every single Yid with Hashem Echad. So that's point number one. The Rebbe takes it a step further. The Rebbe says even more so. One could think that it will be sufficient, it will be enough if he's just involved with Yidden and with things that are connected directly with Yiddishkeit, Torah, and mitzvahs. So here we have the Hoirah that the Kohanim and Levim have to participate in the Avodah of also making out of other lands a part of Eretz Yisrael. That it too should become part of the borders of Eretz Yisrael. In other words, dealing also with the things of the world that on their own are not necessarily absolutely necessary for Yiddishkeit. We need to take these things to broaden the borders of the Yid, meaning to utilize these things in Avodas Hashem in order to increase the greatness and fame of Hashem. And through all of this we hasten the bittul, the nullification of the Golus, by getting rid of the one and only reason for the Golus, which is Mipnei Chatoeinu Golinu Mi'artzeinu. And then Miyad Negolim were redeemed immediately, Begula Mitzvah Shleima, which then the Yidden will receive all of Eretz Yisrael with all of its borders, and including also the broadening of the borders of Eretz Yisrael. As the Pasuk says, Yarchiv Hashem will make wider your borders. Also the lands of Keni, Knizi, V'Kadmoini. And furthermore, as it says, Hasid Eretz Yisrael, that eventually Eretz Yisrael will spread out to the whole world. The Vias Mashiach Tzedkeinu B'Kariv Mamash.